We have not had one of these in a while, so it's time to pick up the time lost in missing out on one of these, which is a rant video. Today we are complaining to Blizzard about something. What we are complaining to Blizzard about is that since last week, with the implementation of the horrific visions and the rewards, the corruption enchants you can earn from the horrific visions, last week we only had the minor version, the smaller version, and now this reset you have been able to get yourself the big one, the epic version of this enchant. Now, what is the kind of annoying part for this enchant? Well, Blizzard sort of dug out from the old days of BFA one of the actually last features of borrowed powers that we had in the game. Many players might not even be at this point familiar with the term, which once upon a time used to be practically a buzzword. Basically, the borrowed power was a gimmick that Blizzard would come up with every season to massively empower your character. Or in some cases, it was for the entire expansion. For example, the legendaries from Legion. Being able to massively empower your character, each and every legendary, the best in slot ones were upwards of 10, even 15% damage increase on a single item. That was seen as a borrowed power because then it went away in BFA, and then in BFA you got Azerite armor, another type of borrowed power, and at the same time, starting from the third tier of the expansion with Eternal Palace, you also got the essences on your necklace as another kind of borrowed power. And then we even tripled up in the very same expansion. Not only we had Azerite armor, not only we had essences, in the last season of BFA you also got corruptions that you could slam all over your gear, and then of course that you all lost come Shadowlands. And that's when Blizzard went on with basically the purge of borrowed powers. Ever since Shadowlands into Dragonflight into the War Within, we haven't truly had that level of super powerful borrowed powers anymore. So Blizzard brought back these corruptions alongside the horrific visions from BFA. So players were immediately somewhat excited about the notion of returning abilities or returning effects like Twilight Devastation, like Infinite Stars, which so much damage they helped do back in BFA for many specs. However, there were two problems with this enchant. Problem number one is that despite this enchant actually being buffed a couple times from the PTR to the release of this feature, the enchant is very weak. Even on a good day, even on some of the better specs for this enchant, it's at best like a 2% damage or healing increase. Even the epic, the big version of the enchant, it's like a maybe 2% increase. That's the first disappointing part. A lot of the enjoyment of players back in BFA was the fact that they knew that Infinite Stars proccing and seeing the effect of the ability, or Twilight Devastation proccing and seeing the big beam traveling towards the pack of mobs was going to do like 15, 20, even 30% of your damage. So when you saw it, it was a very big thing. Big power up, big DPS numbers about to happen because you saw that effect. Meanwhile, now they have, yes, been brought back, yes, you can have that same effect happen to you again, however, it's for like 2% of your damage. So a lot of the enjoyment, now that you know that the enchant is very weak, it loses a lot of power, a lot of value. But that's actually not even the main thing, because right now, and it's been so for basically since the PTR, the simulated, the expected best enchant, which at this point I'm sure you have noticed if you have checked for your own spec, your own classes that you play, the best one across the board for almost all specs, all throughout, is Void Ritual. There is a handful of specs, mostly not scaling too well with secondaries or scaling well with some of the effects, like the rogues playing the Echoing Void damage effect, or things like Fire Mage playing the Gushing Wound rune effect. But for basically most of the others, it's just the rune of the Void Ritual, which is also just secondary stats. So it's a stat stick. It's just a stat stick. It's like if your stat stick trinket had 15 more item levels. That's what this is. It's not actually something you will even properly notice in game. Maybe you will notice it in your sims, instead of doing 2.5 million damage, now you will be doing 2.5 million and 50,000 damage, which is the effect of this Void Ritual rune. That's what feels a little bit bad, to have these enchants be brought back, but then significantly weaken their power, to the extent that now a stat stick, secondary stat effect, is the more powerful one. Imagine if you played back then, unlike all of the babies playing right now, if you played back in BFA and Blizzard said, we are bringing back the essences, and you start thinking about all of the cool different effect of the BFA essences that you could play with right now with your character, and then there is also a new added essence, which is just a passive that gives you 5,000 primary stat, and it's the best one, and everyone just plays that one. So all of the super cool essences you could have played around, like Vision of Perfection, Memory of Lucid Dreams, the Crucible of Flame, the Well of Existence, all of these are gone, because this main stat stick thing just overpowers them all. That would also be kind of annoying. And that's what's happening right now with this godforsaken Void Ritual. It is also pretty funny as a decision from Blizzard, because this is happening basically around the same time we are getting our puzzling cartel chip, dinar, best in slot vendor for us to buy. For most players it would be a trinket from the vendor, as well as the 6 item level increase across the board for both crafted items as well as normal gear to massively increase our power. So it could have been a good argument to have. What if we missed out on this, global 6 item level possible power up, which is close to / near equivalent of like a 9 to 10% power increase for your character to get 6 more item levels? What if we didn't even have that, and instead the power from these new enchants was close to and above 10% in power? That would have made the effects of those enchants much more powerful, feel much more powerful. Hopefully enough, the non-stat stick enchants would have also been buffed, so that now you could play with runes like the Gushing Wound one, the Infinite Stars one, or the Twilight Devastation ones being more than 10% of your damage and actually feeling like they do something, at the expense of not having this, 6 item level increase. Obviously, in the eyes of Blizzard, this would be much worse, because what the item level increase did is it made players go back in Mythic Plus. You can see right over here the effect of the Turbo Boost event patch going live in your weekly Mythic Plus keys. Almost a 50% increase in Mythic Plus keys being done because of the need for players to get more gilded crests for the upgrades. But they could have maybe tied it to something else. Tie, for example, the puzzling cartel dinar chip to require something like 10 Mythic Plus dungeons completed, or maybe tie the reward from the visions to also have you do some dungeons in some way to still eke out some playtime of players into Mythic Plus with this, if it allowed you to get some more powerful feeling out of this enchant. Because yes, sure, you're bringing back a corruption from a previous expansion, which was quite impactful to the damage of a player. It was also quite cinematic in seeing them go off, seeing the effects whenever you were playing. But at the same time, if you bring them back and you make them so terribly weak that not only, even if they were the best option, it will still feel just meh to see them proc, because you know that they are proccing for 1.9% of your damage, which is just very poor. We are not even in that category right now, because those aren't even your strongest enchants right now. Instead, we somehow got away with having a stat stick, essentially an enchant that just buffs your secondary stats as your best one. That's what we are ranting for today. The missed opportunity of bringing back these enchants in a more exciting way for the player base, have them do a bit more, have them do a bit more damage than what they came up with right now, and also more importantly to not have the most boring effect also be the one that is technically the strongest. So everyone trying to min-max their character will still go for that one, the more boring option. I'm sure there are players who are fine with that. I'm sure there are players that, if they could choose to play, say, Windwalker Monk the way it is now, or click a talent which removes all buttons from Windwalker Monk and all you do is basically the auto button rotation. You just play with a one button rotation and you do more damage than a current monk playing with all of its buttons. Some players will actually go for that. Some players will actually choose that option over playing it normally, but I like to believe the majority of the player base wouldn't. So just like in that case, for this scenario, I feel like it's a missed opportunity to have some extra flair delivered to our characters, with Enchants to our helmet being so weak, so disappointing, and also even after being weak and disappointing, we can't even use them anyways, or we will be inting and griefing our own character anyways because it's not even the strongest choice. That's the rant for today on this Thursday. So, with the rant done, it's now time to leave each other for today. We're starting as usual the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, okay, it's finally time. It looks like we're getting close to summer. We are at 27 degrees, slowly creeping closer to the 30 mark.